Welcome to Astro Talk for November 21st, 2021. I am astrologer Ada Pembroke, and today we are going to be talking about planetary remediation. So, before I get into the actual talk, I like to cite my sources when I can, and in this case, it's really important for me to cite my source because I learned so much from this class that a good portion of what I'm going to talk about today is stuff that I learned from this class. So the class that I want to cite is The Proper Care and Feeding of a Birth Chart, Planetary Refinement and Remediation, which is a 4-week course by Austin Coppock. If you've been following me at all, you know that I'm a really big fan of Austin Coppock's work. And this course is one of the reasons why I'm such a very big fan. And you can get a copy of this course, and I highly recommend it if you can afford it. It's available at a shop on austincoppock.com. And the reason why this course is such a strong influence is because there is not very much that is like it anywhere. It might actually even be unique. One of the things that he talks about in the course is that Western astrology is very good at telling you when you have a problem, but it doesn't have anything to say about what to do about it. One of the big innovations of psychological astrology during the 20th century was that finally people were talking about what to do about all of these horrible things that your birth chart was subjecting you to. But the problem with psychological astrology is that if it cannot solve a problem by giving you insight, consciousness, and someone to talk to, it doesn't really have that much to say to you. And there are a lot of problems that can't be solved just by recognizing them as problems. And this is something that really bothered Austin. So what he did is he started looking around for other branches of astrology that actually deal with problems. And he discovered that Indian astrology is very good at identifying problems and then prescribing solutions to them. So the type of astrology that he teaches is actually a blend of Western astrology, both modern and traditional, though mostly traditional, and Indian astrology, or Jyotish. And so what I am going to be teaching you today is actually heavily influenced by Indian astrology. And it was this class and a lecture that I heard, or not a lecture, a podcast interview that I heard with Jyotishi Freedom Cole that convinced me that Indian astrology is really worth studying, even though it's super complicated and my brain starts to spin whenever I see Sanskrit. So, let's start with some theory. What exactly is planetary remediation? Planetary remediation is the art of diagnosing problems with difficult planets and finding solutions. It is the process of using your birth chart to identify places where you're having problems in your life and then applying remediation techniques to figure out what to do about them. There are going to be some overlaps between psychology and medicine and what we're going to be talking about. And there are times where astrology points to a medical condition that really is better served by a medical practitioner. If you have any kind of real injury or mental or physical health issue, see a health practitioner. Do not go to an astrologer first. There are many times, however, when the problem that you have is something that just is not covered by insurance, frankly, or that isn't even recognized necessarily by the medical community as a problem, because your problem with stage fright is just not a priority in a medical system that is tied up dealing with people with cancer and COVID and heart disease and diabetes. So one of the things that remediation is very good for is addressing these quality of life issues that are not medical or psychological problems per se, but that aren't giving you the best quality of life that you can possibly have. So, the goal of remediation is balance. But when I say that the goal of remediation is balance, I don't mean that it is a 50-50 balance. You need 5% sun, 5% moon, 5% Mercury, 5% Venus. Balance is subjective, and it depends on your life and the circumstances of your life. If you are an actor who is appearing on stage all of the time, you're going to need a lot more sun and Mercury than somebody who works on an assembly line and is doing highly detailed mechanical work. And so when we talk about having enough, having too much, healthy, unhealthy, it's going to be very important that you look at your life, you look at the things that you do, you look at the things that you need to do, and you adjust accordingly. Some of you are going to need more Mercury than others. Some of you are going to need more Mars than others. And it is an important part of discernment to recognize what balance of planets you need in order to meet the challenges of your life. That's what health is. Having enough and not too much to live a healthy, happy, and productive life. So what do I mean by healthy? A healthy planet is a planet that you're comfortable with. It's a planet that expresses itself appropriately in your life. You have enough. It doesn't upset you. It isn't interfering with your life. You can also have a planet be deficient, and that is a case where your life requires the planet to function more than it is. That might be a life where, if you're a mathematician, you might require an incredible amount of Mercury. If you are a soldier, you might require an incredible amount of Mars. If you're on the battlefield and your Mars function isn't working properly, you're going to really experience that. And you're going to need to find ways to dial that up. A planet can also be excessive. It can be expressing it too much in your life. We talked, if you attended my class on the planets a couple of days ago, I talked about what an excessive sun looks like, someone who is egotistical. I used Napoleon as an example. That is an example of a planet that is excessive or runaway. If you are a person who lives a very peaceful life, maybe knitting sweaters or something, and you can't sleep at night and you're jittery and you're drinking too much coffee, that is an excessive Mercury. And remediation would say that you either need to find an outlet for that Mercury so that that level of Mercury is appropriate for your life, or you need to figure out a way to dial it down. One thing to be aware of. I'm actually calling myself out. So somebody just said, just call me out, Ada. That's okay. LMAO. I was actually just calling myself out because I was feeling really tired a couple of hours ago, and I had this really big bottle of cold brew coffee. And you might notice I'm talking a little bit faster than usual. My Mercury, I needed Mercury, so I drank coffee, and now my Mercury is going a little bit on overdrive more than usual. So one of the things to be aware of as we talk about what a healthy planet looks like is that a planet can be excessive in one area of life and deficient in another area of life. Excessive in one area and deficient in another. An example that Austin gives that I think is a really good one is your relationship with the word should. Saturn is associated with the word should, and most people have the tendency to say that they should do something more than they should in one area of life, and say that less than they should in another area of life. So you might be a person who is really persnickety about always having dinner on the table at exactly 5:05 every day. While at work, you might be 3 weeks late with a project. Excuse me. That's an example of having an excessive overactive Saturn in one area of life and a deficient Saturn in another area of life. Yeah, sorry if I'm talking too quickly for everyone. I'm trying to slow down a little bit, but like today I've been on hyperspeed anyway. Alright, so let's talk about diagnosis. How do you know when a planet is in trouble? The first step is to develop awareness. Some things that you can do to develop awareness are spend some time thinking and journaling. Literally examine your life, stop and think. Take the list of planets that we're going to be going over in a minute and compare your feelings toward those planets with what I say healthy feelings are. Practice unguided meditation and observe your thoughts. By unguided meditation, I mean like Buddhist-style meditation, where you are trying to empty your mind. One of the purposes of that style of meditation is to see what thoughts pop up when you're not trying to think about things. The thoughts that pop up when you're trying not to think, those intrusive thoughts tell you an awful lot about what wavelength you're on. If you sit down to meditate and all you can think of is your to-do list, that's a sign of an overactive Saturn. If you sit down to meditate and all you can think about is the Wikipedia entry that you were looking at before you started meditating, that's a sign of an overactive Mercury. If you sit down to meditate and all you can think about is what you're going to make for dinner, that's an overactive Moon. So one of the ways to diagnose which planets are overactive is to literally sit down and listen and see who shows up when no one is supposed to be there. And another way that you can develop awareness of your relationship with planets is to have a conversation with your friends and allies, and I say human or spirit, and ask for their help getting perspective. This is a good use for tarot cards if you're a tarot card reader. This is a good use for, sitting down with your closest friend and being like, so I want to improve myself. What are some things that you see? Ask them to be kind of a mirror for you. But what do healthy planets look like? You can't tell if a planet is unhealthy or not if you don't know what a healthy planet looks like. So what we are about to do is we are going to go through the 7 personal or traditional planets. The Sun, Moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. And we are going to talk about what it looks like when those functions are healthy. My suggestion as we go through this section is to pay attention to what we're saying and compare it to how you feel. And if you're feeling called out when I'm talking about a healthy planet, that's a clue that that's a planet that you might want to do remediation work for. And the reason why I would like you to apply this to yourselves is not so you can feel bad, obviously, but because later on in the lecture we're going to be talking about remediation techniques, and it will be much easier for you to apply the things that we're talking about if by the time you get there you already know some planets that you have a difficult time working with. And if you know those planets and you need help getting ideas during the Q&A section, that would be a good opportunity to ask me, I am having trouble with this planet and I'd like some remediation techniques, and we can talk about some specifics for how you might apply this to your life. So we're not going to be looking at charts today, but I would really like to see us talk through some examples of planets that you're having a difficult time with and come up with some ideas together for some things that you might do practically as remediation techniques. This is a lecture that I really hope will be one that you are able to apply to your lives immediately. You all know, if you've been following me for a while, that I really like to be pragmatic and teach an astrology that you can use. And this is a situation where if you're not using the things that you learned from this lecture did not fulfill its purpose at all. So, and before I go on, I should say that the reason we are dealing with the personal planets instead of the transpersonal planets is because each of the planets that we're going to go over, the personal planets, is a planet that all of us need to have a good relationship with. Everybody has a Saturn function, everybody has a Jupiter function, everybody has a Sun. Not everybody has a personal relationship with Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. There are some of you who do have personal relationships with the transpersonal planets, and I was really delighted to see us have a conversation this morning where we talked about how to know if you have a personal relationship with the transpersonal planets. And if any of you are here and would like help talking through remediation techniques for transpersonal planets that you have a personal relationship with, we can talk through those as specific examples. But because, ironically, personal relationships with the transpersonal planets, when they exist, are so personal, it is something that I cannot talk about generally without knowing something about your individual situation. So we may get into that later, depending on the questions that you have, but our focus overall is going to be on those personal planets that everyone needs to develop a healthy relationship with. So someone just said, with my pragmatism, it's your Saturn Sun, I'd bet money. Oh, absolutely, you win. But I'm not sure anyone here would bet against you. You do have a Saturn, though. You just don't have a good relationship with your Saturn yet. That's why you're here, isn't it? Alright, so let's dive in. What does it look like to have a healthy relationship with the Sun? When you have a healthy relationship with the Sun, you shine like the sun shines. You're comfortable being seen. Now, when I say that you're comfortable being seen, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're like the person on this slide here who's got the guitar and is like sliding along the stage and is like, look at me, look at me, look at me, look at me. Remember, I said that these relationships are relative. If you are a Capricorn sun with a Cancer moon and Scorpio rising, you're probably not going to be somebody who is sliding across the stage like that. For you, being healthy, shining, or having a healthy relationship with the sun in which you shine, might mean doing an awful lot of shining for the plants in your backyard. And that, for you, is a healthy balance. But if you're a person with 5 planets in Sagittarius, Leo rising, and what's another really extroverted planet? Or sign. And Moon in Gemini. And you never leave your basement, that is probably a person who has a difficult relationship with the sun. And I believe that this is an area where you're going to know in your gut if you have a healthy relationship with the sun or not. And I think that that's going to be the case with all of these planets. Like, if you are running into something where you know that you don't have a healthy relationship and you don't have balance, you're going to be like, oh, crap. Yeah, I know I really need to work on that one. Another example of having a healthy sun. You have a healthy self-image. Your personal narrative feels comfortable and matches your life and circumstances. So if you are a wizard who has a PhD in evocation and lives in a tower, and do you believe that you are a wizard with a PhD in evocation and lives in a tower? You've got a healthy sun. You have a story that you tell about yourself that matches the circumstances of your life. Stephen Forrest says that one of the definitions of insanity is that your personal narrative doesn't match your life to such a degree that it's ludicrous. And it's a sign of a healthy sun that you have that narrative that matches. Another sign is that you have an objective view of yourself. You have an honest and accurate view of your strengths and weaknesses. You're not being defensive and trying to cover up the fact that you have certain faults. You accept your strengths and you're not shy about them. You accept your weaknesses and you're not ashamed of them. You have an accurate view of who you are. And lastly, you have self-acceptance. You don't make apologies for your weaknesses. You don't get defensive or try to hide it when you do something that hurts people. But you fundamentally accept that, if you are a naturally bookish person and you're not such a avid traveler, it's who you are. And you're not constantly beating yourself up because you really should get to Rome someday. So, what have people said so far? So someone said, for some reason that placement set Cap, Sun, Cancer, Moon, Scorpio rising gave me the stereotypical pipe organ playing vampire in the basement. But a very comfy basement. Well, yes, the comfy basement is important. Like that Cancer Moon, they're not going to be sitting on a hard concrete floor. I mean, are you kidding? And someone says, if you flip the Sun and Moon, you have me. I am so sorry. I did not mean to call you out at all. That was not my intention. So someone asked, can a healthy relationship with a planet be disrupted by a deficient or excessive relationship with another? Yes. Yes, absolutely. One of the things that is interesting about each of the personal planets except for Mercury is that they all exist in some kind of polarity. Venus and Mars are natural opposites, Saturn and Jupiter are natural opposites, and the Sun and Moon are natural opposites. So having an excessive Venus might make you have a deficient Mars, or it might be expressed as a deficient Mars is a better way to put that. An excessive Jupiter can express itself as a deficient Saturn. That's a very good question. And this is a very important point. Someone just said, I'm going to go through this talk with a checklist of the planets and just go, yep, that one too, yep. The point of this talk is not to make you feel bad. The point of this talk is to help you get that objective view of the self. And if you walk out of this talk going, oh, crap, I am a waste of a human being, you're wrong, because that's not the point. Alright, so moving on to the moon. What are the signs of a healthy moon? The first one is that you're able to feel hungry. You can identify what you need and you can discern what it is. Now, hunger can mean food. The moon rules your physical relationship with food. If you never get hungry, one, that might be a sign of a physical issue and you should see your doctor. But it is also an expression of an unhealthy mood. The moon rules physical hunger, and if you just never want to eat, there's something up with your moon. It also rules other hungers, other cravings. If you never want to go outside, and you are not a vampire, then that could be a sign of an unhealthy moon. If you never feel the need to be more comfortable than you are, that's the sign of an unhealthy moon. If you never want to exercise, that's the sign of an unhealthy moon. Another sign of a healthy moon is that you feel comfortable. You choose comfort when it's appropriate. You're not always efficient and productive. Sometimes the right answer is not to push through and keep working. Sometimes the answer is to say, I am tired and it is time to quit for the day, even though it's early. If you are a person who always wears the uncomfortable shoes and never changes into your pajamas at night, that could be the sign of an unhealthy moon. Another sign of a healthy moon is that you accept your needs. You don't judge or berate yourself for having them. Someone who gets really angry with themselves when they're hungry and eating a salad is not enough is a person who doesn't have a healthy relationship with their moon. A person who feels like they can't work as much as other people and is berating themselves for that. That's an example of an unhealthy moon too. And the last sign of a healthy moon is that you're able to meet your needs in an appropriate way. Now, obviously, there are times where you can't meet your needs. If you are in the middle of the desert and your car has broken down and you're thirsty, it's not a sign of an unhealthy moon that you can't get a drink. It's a sign of being screwed. But if you consistently fail to feel hungry, or you consistently fail to meet your needs when you do feel hungry, that is the sign of an unhealthy moon. And if you find yourself frequently in the position where you go too far, you're craving comfort food, and instead of having a bowl of macaroni and cheese, you have 3 boxes of macaroni and cheese, that's a sign of an unhealthy moon too. That's a sign of an excessive moon. So, as somebody says, I did not expect the moon to check so many boxes I need to work on. Yeah, I'll be honest, the moon has been a really big source of work for me over the last year. Saturn has been conjunct my moon at around 6 degrees of Aquarius for on and off the last year or so. I think I'm getting that timing right. It feels like it anyway. And one of the things that I've been really surprised by is, I was expecting this to be a year where Saturn was like, put down the comfort and get to work. And what I actually discovered is that Saturn isn't just the planet that says no. Saturn is the planet that knows what healthy and reasonable limits are. And what was coming up for me during my Saturn transit was not that I needed to work more or buckle down or stop prioritizing comfort. It was that I refused to acknowledge when I was hungry and stop and eat. I refused to change into my comfy clothes at the end of the day. I berated myself for having needs. All of these bad lunar problems, and the Saturn work that I actually needed to do was go out and buy a pair of comfy socks, which is rather counterintuitive if you've been listening to me talk about Saturn for a while, or anyone else, pretty much, because people tend not to emphasize that part of Saturn. They just want to see Saturn as cracking the whip. But depending on what kind of person you are, when Saturn meets the moon, Saturn might be like, okay, so this planet in your sky, you've been ignoring this. You should do something about this. I didn't actually go out and buy the fuzzy socks yet. I actually asked for them for Christmas, so. But I am hoping that I get fuzzy socks for Christmas, and I will be very much enjoying them in January. So it looks like we've got a few people who need to work on their relationship with the moon, which is kind of not surprising considering I'm a person who needed to work on my relationship with the moon. I probably drew you all together so that we can do our lunar work together. Alright, so Mercury. What are the signs of a healthy Mercury? Mercury communicates. You're able to form coherent thoughts and communicate them to others. If you're using the word a lot, like I've been today, your Mercury might be a little bit deficient. In all seriousness, though, the ability to be articulate and take things that are going on in your brain and put them into the brains of other people, that's a sign of a healthy Mercury. If you're struggling talking, if you're struggling to jump into conversations when you need to, if you're struggling to communicate your needs, that's Mercury and the Moon together. That's a sign where you need to maybe do some work on your Mercury. Your Mercury might not be enough. Another sign of a healthy Mercury is that you think things through. You don't jump into things rashly or excessively multitask. And no, I'm not calling all of you out, I swear. Mercury has the reputation for being all over the place because it rules Gemini, and Gemini has a tendency to be all over the place. But Mercury also rules Virgo, and the ability to have discernment, which is a very Virgoan trait, and focus and think through things and do things well is one of the signs of a healthy Mercury. Another sign of a healthy Mercury is that you are calm and you are coordinated. If you play tabletop RPGs or possibly video game RPGs, you might be familiar with ability scores, particularly Dex. Mercury rules real-life dexterity. If you are tripping over your feet, or walking into tables, or shutting your fingers in the door, that's actually a sign of an unhealthy Mercury, and a Mercury that needs some remediation. These are all physical things, and might be the sign of a medical disorder, but astrologically it's a sign of an unhealthy Mercury. And if you have a hard time sitting still, that's also a sign that you have a Mercury function that needs some work. Oh, when I said walking into tables, I was totally calling myself out. Like, I have permanent bruises at the level of one of the tables where I live because I am literally constantly walking into the corner of that table. It's awful. Someone says, listen, my awareness of where my body is great. It's just where everything else is. That's the problem. Yeah, you're doing a lot better than me because I don't know where my body is either. And then another sign of a healthy Mercury is that you're aware of the limits of thought. You're comfortable with things that aren't rational, like subjectivity and religion. So one of the signs of an excessive Mercury is that you insist that absolutely everything be logical all the time. You don't like art, you don't like poetry, to an excessive degree. Like, art and poetry aren't for everybody. You don't live in math land all the time is a sign of a healthy Mercury. Granted, if you're a nuclear physicist, you might live in math land all the time. Remember, this is all about balance in your life. But, you know, if you are a person who works in the drive-thru at McDonald's and you can't stop talking in quadratic equations, that might be the sign of a Mercury that's in overdrive just a little bit. So someone just said that ADHD is an unbalanced Mercury. As a person who isn't a medical professional, I probably shouldn't agree with that, but I agree with that. Obviously, don't see an astrologer, see a real medical practitioner if you suspect that you have ADHD. But yeah. You joined OBOD and you didn't tell me? Sorry. See, what I just did just there, that is an unhealthy Mercury. And I kind of did do it on purpose. But, alright. So, what is the sign of a healthy Venus? A healthy Venus is able to experience pleasure. You're able to seek out and enjoy the pleasant things in life. If you just went through this autumn and you didn't enjoy at least pictures of autumn leaves falling. And apologies if anyone is in the southern hemisphere, but I think that everyone in this talk is in the northern hemisphere. If you didn't enjoy pictures of falling leaves, or pumpkin spice blend, or the ability to wear lovely knits, or any of the beautiful things that are associated with the autumn season, that's a sign of a deficient Venus. If you look at pictures of cute puppies and kittens on the internet and you start grumbling like Ebenezer Scrooge, that's the sign of a deficient Venus. You're able to see beauty in things. You're able to see and appreciate beauty in art in the natural world. If you can't drive past a snow-covered mountain without catching your breath, you need Venus remediation. If you are completely and totally bored in an art museum and can't appreciate the beauty of anything, deficient Venus. If you can't appreciate the beauty in your fellow human beings, that's also a sign of an unhealthy Venus. You are able to embrace relationships. You enjoy supportive relationships. If you look around and you can't find 3 people who have your back at least a little bit, you're a person who needs to do some Venus work. If there's no one in your life who makes you laugh, if there's no one who makes you smile, if there's no one you look forward to hanging out with, these are all signs of unhealthy Venus. And another sign of an unhealthy or of a healthy Venus is the willingness to be challenged. You're willing to do things that are uncomfortable when necessary. One of the signs of an excessive Venus is that every time you get uncomfortable, you run away. And this is one of the areas where you can see the natural opposition between Venus and Mars. Mars, as we will talk about in a moment, is about doing things that are uncomfortable. Venus is about doing things that are comfortable. If you always have to be comfortable 100% of the time and you never do anything that doesn't feel good, that is a sign of an excessive Venus and a deficient Mars. So someone just said, it's been more than 2 years since we sought out actually fun clothes. This is a deficient Venus. To be fair, that might also be COVID. You know, if you have been replacing your actually fun clothes with fuzzy socks, I think that might be the moon saying, excuse me, you need more of me than Venus right now. But, you know, you might be entering a time where you need to rebalance things, which raises a really good point. I've been focusing on people who over the course of their lives need more than others, but there are going to be times in your life where, you know, you need more moon function. If you're grieving someone who has died, you're going to need more of your moon function than when you are studying for final exams. We have all just come out of a period where, you know, I kind of wonder if a lot of us are looking at the moon function and going, because we're going through a time collectively as a society where we all need comfort more than we ordinarily would. We all need that moon function more than we ordinarily would. And if you are living in a time and a place where you never feel safe, you never feel comfortable, and you feel hungry and you never feel fed, that's not your fault. That's the times that you're living in. And I kind of wonder if, for many of us, we have insatiable moons because it's kind of terrifying to be alive right now. Hey, if you can crochet socks, more power to you. I tried to crochet slippers one time, and they were just so like bumpy and hard on the bottom of my feet that I couldn't walk in them. And I was very sad because it took me days to crochet them. But if you can figure it out, I want that pattern, please, because I like crocheting a lot better than knitting most of the time. Anyway, someone says that, what if I know that they have my back, but my brain says they're going to leave as soon as you ask them to help you with something? That might be something to talk about with a therapist, but that might also be a sign of an unhealthy Venus. Is your brain right? Or are you just afraid of being vulnerable? That actually might be a sign of an unhealthy Venus and an unhealthy Sun. Not being willing to be honest about needing people is a deficient Sun. A part of being honest about who you are is not just being honest about, having brown hair and blue eyes. It's about being able to stay on stage and be honest, metaphorically, when you really need someone to talk to, when you really need a shoulder to cry on. So, yeah. Someone just said, starting to think that the list of planets that I have that are healthy is going to be significantly shorter or non-existent. I think, honestly, all of us are going to have a difficult time with the planets if this is the first time you're working on this. I mean, I had been working with astrology for the better part of a decade when I saw this class, or when I took this class, and it was very eye-opening to me. And I was critical of astrology earlier when I said that Western astrology is not very good at doing anything that isn't just raising consciousness. But raising consciousness is not nothing. And I was still like, oh crap, when I got through this class. I was like, I have to do everything. Take note of all these things, but we're going to talk a bit later about how to prioritize. Don't allow yourself to get overwhelmed. Just sit with it as best you can. Let it flow through you like water. All right, Mars. One of the signs of a healthy Mars is that you are able to pursue goals. You put your drive and energy to good use in pursuit of a mission or a goal. If you are constantly saying, I want to do that, and you never do it, and like literally, you're like, I want that, and I don't do it, that's a sign of a very deficient Mars. Another sign of a healthy Mars is that you're comfortable with competition. You know when it's time to compete, and you embrace the challenge. If you don't want to compete with people when you're playing a board game, there are people who don't find that sort of thing fun. But if that drive to compete never, ever kicks in at all, even when you're playing games, or, sometimes we all want to be first off the line when we're driving, or you see somebody going to the register and you want to get there first, so you don't want to wait in line. Like, these are all signs of a healthy competitive instinct. If that instinct never kicks in for you, that's a sign of a Mars that needs some work. A healthy Mars knows when to destroy. You know the difference between reckless destruction and a surgeon's knife. Now, this is going to sound a little controversial, but we destroy things every day. If you eat avocado, you are throwing away avocado peels and pits. That is destruction. You're destroying an avocado plant that could have grown into an avocado tree. That's healthy destruction. Hoarding is a sign of an unhealthy Mars. You don't know when to destroy that egg carton or that sweater that hasn't fit you for 25 years. And another sign of a healthy Mars is a healthy immune system. This is another sign, another place where there's an overlap between astrology and medicine. If you have an autoimmune disorder, you should be working with your doctor. But if you have an autoimmune disorder, it's also a sign of an unhealthy Mars. And doing some Mars remediation in consultation with your doctor and in addition to medical care, could help you if you have a difficult time with your immune system. In COVID times, sanitizing your hands is a martial thing. You are killing the germs that could kill you. It's going to war. So that is Mars. Jupiter. A healthy Jupiter moves towards balance. Jupiter naturally tries to balance the other planets that it touches. One of the things that I learned from Austin is that Jupiter is the planet of remediation. Jupiter transits are times when you naturally try to engage in remediation. If Jupiter is touching your Sun, that's a time when you are really well equipped to work on solar remediation, work on your ego, work on your ability to shine. If it is touching your Venus, that's a good time to work on your relationships and your sense of aesthetics and your ability to feel pleasure. Jupiter puts things in context. You're able to get distance on a situation and see the systems and the big picture. If you feel as though you are always looking at things so that, like, you're reading a book and your nose is touching the paper, you're too zoomed in, you can't see things in context, you can't see the big picture, you're focusing on this tiny detail when the rest of the world is falling down around you, that's a sign of an unhealthy Jupiter. The function of backing up, getting contexts, seeing the whole story, understanding people's behavior within the context of systems. These are all healthy Jupiter functions. Someone just asked what the last one for Mars was. A healthy immune system. If you're able to reasonably fight off sickness, it's a sign of a healthy Mars. If every time someone gets a cold, you also get the cold, or if you have some kind of autoimmune disorder, in astrological speak, that is an unhealthy Mars. No problem. All right, back to Jupiter. Jupiter loves wisdom. If you're willing to learn from others and don't need to make all of your own mistakes, that's a sign of a healthy Jupiter. If somebody says, don't eat that, that's disgusting, and you absolutely have to try it, that's not a healthy Jupiter. Yeah, like it might be, if somebody's like, that chili pepper is hot and you want to try it. But, like, if you see 5 people run over a cliff and you have to try it for yourself just to see what it's like, that's a sign of an unhealthy Jupiter. Literally and metaphorically. So someone just said nearsightedness is an unhealthy Jupiter. No, I was talking metaphorically. One of the critiques that I got in graduate school was that I would spend 3 days editing a sentence and I would struggle to get my papers in on time. That is an example of an unhealthy Jupiter. I was so focused on getting this one little detail right that my papers were almost late. That was a very valid critique. Another sign of a healthy Jupiter is that you're aware of your limits. Everything in moderation, even occasionally moderation. If you're drinking too much, unhealthy Jupiter. If you're working too much, unhealthy Jupiter. So someone just said, with all the traveling we've been doing, of necessity lately, we've been learning a little bit about trusting society's curation of things and experiences as maybe better than we can research for ourselves sometimes. That's a really good point. And actually something that maybe I should think about a little bit, because I have the tendency to be like, oh, that's popular, so I'm not going to do that. Like, I didn't read Harry Potter until it was literally assigned to me in college because it was so popular, I just assumed that it wasn't very good. Thank you, Aquarius Moon. But, yeah, being able to engage in society and let other people inform your decisions a bit, that's a bit Jupiterian. Oh, good. Somebody might have a healthy Jupiter. That's awesome. Well, you have a lot of Pisces, so you have a lot of experience working with Jupiter because Jupiter rules Pisces. That's awesome, though. Woohoo! We got another person with a healthy Jupiter. When we get to the end of these, I'm gonna be asking you all what your relationships with planets are, like which ones are hard for you and which ones are not easy. But we've got Saturn left, and we can't miss Saturn because then Saturn will come after all of us and we won't be able to sleep tonight. Actually, me saying that might give you all nightmares anyway, so I apologize. Alright, so what does a healthy Saturn look like? You have discipline. You behave with maturity and self-control, and you make promises and you keep them. You have an awareness of your limits. If you set out to do something, you do it. If you need to get work done, you get your work done. Healthy Saturn. I don't think this is a surprise to anybody here. Another sign, you also have an objective view of the negative. You're willing to face negative things, but you aren't overly pessimistic. You have a balanced view. If you're too pessimistic, that's a sign of an unhealthy Saturn. If you're a person who is running through that dog that's in the middle of a fire drinking tea is like, this is fine. That's an unhealthy Saturn. That is a deficient Saturn. You have enough should. This is something that I mentioned earlier. You know when it's appropriate to do things when you don't want to. You aren't always doing things you don't want to do just because you don't want to do them. This is one of the things that I was working on during my Saturn-Moon conjunction. If I don't want to do something and I'm like, well, I should, I have always had the tendency to do it anyway, regardless of whether I actually want to do it or not. I would do things like, oh, let's do 6 months from now. I really should do it. If I have a migraine, maybe doing the thing that isn't due for 6 months is not the best use of my time. That's legitimately something that I struggled with. And non-binary thinking. You're comfortable with shades of gray. You don't see everything in terms of right, wrong, good, bad. Saturn is like Siskel and Hebert, if you're old enough to know that reference. Saturn is very good at thumbs up, thumbs down. Those feelings in your gut that are like, heck yes, heck no, that's Saturn. The ability to recognize that not everything is a hell yes or a hell no is also a sign of a healthy Saturn because it means that your Saturn is not excessive. So we've got a couple people saying that Saturn is probably the most constructive things in their charts. That's awesome. Someone else said that a therapist once told them, you should not should all over yourself. Well, don't should all over yourself, they said. I like that. I'm going to totally steal that. So before we dive into the actual task of remediation, what do you do about these problems? I'm really curious to hear from the people who are taking this live. What planets do you struggle with, and what planets are planets that you have a good relationship with? So that we're not here all day, what is probably your most dysfunctional planet, and what is your most functional planet? Let's see what the range is here. Someone just said that I have an advantage on non-binary thinking because of gender. That's awesome. Several people are typing. Yes. Good. That means you have a clear picture of what's going on here. Yay! I have done my job. This is good. So someone said, either my sun or my moon are my most dysfunctional planets leaning toward my moon. And you said that Saturn was your more functional planet, right? And someone says, most functional, Jupiter. Least functional, the sun. Oh, that's interesting. Either Saturn or Venus is your most functional. Don't just pick Venus because it's the easy one. Remember, accurate view of yourself. If you actually find that you have a good relationship with Saturn, I promise not to judge you for all the times when you said that you don't. Saturn is probably the most functional. Between Mercury and Jupiter, for least functional, probably Mercury. Oh, that's really interesting. I'm really surprised. Sun, Venus, Jupiter, and sometimes Saturn. Are those your most functional or least functional? Somebody says that Sun in the 7th house. So I'm guessing that's a hard one for you. Someone just says that it's really hard to pick just one. Jupiter's probably my most functional, though Saturn wasn't actually terrible. Good! Okay, so Sun, Venus, Jupiter, and sometimes Saturn are most functional. Cool. Yeah, someone said that the moon landed them in the hospital. I have been there. Literally in the hospital. But just because that happened to you does not mean that you did not learn from it. Especially if you have healthy Saturn. So, someone says that the moon and Venus definitely need work, and the sun and Mercury too. Mars is improving. Well, that's good. It's hard to improve Mars. It really is. Oh, Canva. You don't need to update right now. This is not the time. Alright, we've got a couple people typing, and then we're going to start talking about tools for balancing difficult planets. I think it's cool that it's a balance. Like, if everybody here was like this planet, I would be kind of concerned, because I would be like, are we reinforcing each other in our bad habits? That's not a good thing. But we have some patterns, which makes sense. But on the whole, everybody's an individual, which makes my Aquarius planet smile. So someone was just said that, I was going to say that Mars and Saturn almost seem like opposites to me, and then I remember that mine are square. Yep. Your subjective experience, yours and everyone's subjective experience, strongly flavors your experience of planets. Someone just said, kindergarten teacher voice. Everyone's special in their own way. And someone says, on first guess, my moon feels the healthiest and least functional is Saturn. Too extreme in either direction. Pretty proud of Mars progress. I have an autoimmune illness, so I had to work on it. The sauna is magical. You know, I've never actually been in a sauna. That's like definitely on my bucket list. But I think before sauna on my bucket list is going to hot springs. There are a ton of them in Oregon. I have never been. That is pretty horrible in my opinion. Someone says that the moon is the most functional now. Saturn is surprisingly well. Mars requires attention but is amenable. Mercury will bury me one day. Mood. And get a STEAM achievement for it or something. Oh, that's awesome. Someone says that makes sense why Saturn doesn't want to work with me. Trine with Mars, which is very deficient. But Saturn usually likes to work, but I think sometimes Mars, I think, distracts Saturn. By which you mean your Mars is chasing around, or your Saturn is chasing around your Mars going, stop doing that! I mean, it sounds like a thing that Saturn would do to Mars, right? Or Mars is interrupting Saturn, yeah. So someone asked, how many of the people with functional Saturns have day charts out of curiosity? Interestingly, only one person has a day chart and 4 have night charts. How many of you I'm going to type this in here. How many of you have day charts, period, with healthy Saturns or not? Like, if there is only one person other than me with a day chart, then, you know, the numbers that we have here are not going to be accurate. By which I mean, only one person said that they have a day chart and a healthy Saturn. If I'm the only person with a day chart other than one other person here, like, that's not going to be weird. So we've got 2 people with day charts, 2 people with night charts who've answered so far. There's someone with a day chart but not a great relationship with Saturn. If there is an imbalance there, people with night charts are going to have difficult relationships with Saturn that are going to require them to work with Saturn. If you attended my talk on Frudaria a couple of weeks ago, I mentioned that people with night charts often encounter Saturn as an outside authority when they're teenagers. And if you're encountering Saturn as the police when you're a teenager, you're not going to be able to avoid learning important Saturn lessons. If Saturn is just, you know, a tendency to maybe stay up a little later than you should studying, you might not actually have the motivation to work on developing a healthy Saturn. Interesting. So far we have 3 people who say that they have day charts. So it might be that we've got some people here who have day charts, and because Saturn is not their most malefic planet, their attention on fixing things has been elsewhere. So yes, Saturn is better behaved in the charts of day people who are born during the day. Saturn is a more difficult planet for people who are born at night. Saturn is the day sect. Yep. Alright, so now that you have your planets in mind that you want to work on, let's talk about remediation. What the crap do we do with all this information? So step 1 was to develop awareness. And that's what we've been working on as we've been talking about these planets. Getting a view of what a healthy planet looks like helps you to see in comparison if your planets are deficient or not. So, after you are aware of the problem, you want to develop a conscious program to improve the health of that planet. And some advice that I have for this is don't try to tackle everything at once. This is why I was so particular about pick the planet that is having the hardest time. Because if you're just getting started with remediation, it is so tempting to be like, alright, I have to fix these 5 planets, and I'm going to do it now. Pick the planet that is giving you the most grief and work on that. And because all of the planets are naturally connected to each other in kind of a web, you will be working on your most difficult, you will be working on all of your planets when you're working on your most difficult planet. And you will be more likely to make progress because you're focused and not trying to whack all of the moles at the same time. And my other bit of advice for this is to take advantage of Planetary's days and hours. Last month I talked about electional astrology, and I talked about using the planetary days and hours to work with planets. And the reason why I spent so much time talking about that last month, and if you haven't seen that lecture, you should, is because when you're doing planetary remediation, the best time to work on these things is when that planet is online. And that planet is going to be online regardless of transits on its planetary day. So, if you have a hard time with the moon, do lunar remediation on Monday. If you have a hard time with Mercury, do it on Wednesday. Mars is Tuesday, Jupiter is Thursday, Venus is Friday, Saturn is Saturday, and the Sun is Sunday. Put it in your calendar and do something on that day. And if you use the planetary days, and preferably the planetary hours, you will make sure that you're doing a little bit of something once a week. And regular, consistent practice is one of the keys to successful planetary remediation. So one of the essential things to understand is that literally everything you do feeds a planet. If you are thirsty and getting a drink, you're feeding your moon. If you are buckling down and focusing, you are feeding Saturn. If you are drinking a Red Bull, you're feeding Mercury. If you're punching somebody in the face, you're feeding Mars. One of the fun things to do is to pause every once in a while and think about what planet you're feeding. Right now, I am teaching and I am talking and I am broadcasting over the internet, and I am doing a lot of heavy thinking and improvising and entertaining. Hopefully, y'all aren't asleep, which means that right now I am exercising my Mercury to a great degree, and I'm also exercising my Sun. I am getting my performance on. I'm the center of attention, and I'm shining even though you can't see me. I'm about to have a drink of water. I'm going to be feeding my moon. I recognized I was thirsty. I got a drink. Now the moon is here. So if you have an excessive planet and you feed it, it's going to grow. What you feed grows. So if you have an excessive Mercury, cutting out caffeine might be a good idea. If you have an excessive Saturn, being disciplined about stopping at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, ironically, is going to feed Saturn, but it's also going to starve your Saturn a little bit and put things in a healthier place. So the key to remember here is that you want to starve an excessive planet and feed a deficient one. If you find that you're a person who has a hard time responding to your hungers and doesn't know when you're hungry and has the tendency to go, I'll put on the fuzzy socks later, doing things just because they feel comfortable is feeding that planet and is building a connection with that planet. If you feed your moon to such an extent that you are moon-shaped because you are engaging in too many lunar behaviors, going on a fast, obviously talk to your doctor, starves the moon and shrinks that lunar function. So let's start by talking about what to do with deficient planets. Quick bit of feedback here. Which planets do you think are deficient right now for you personally? Just a quick shout out. No need to explain, just shout out some planets. Moon, Sun, Mercury, Moon, Venus. Cool, okay. What do you do with deficient planets and Sun? A deficient planet is a planet that cannot perform its necessary functions. If you're an actor and you don't want to get on stage, it's a deficient Sun. If you are a programmer and you're having a hard time writing algorithms, deficient Mercury. So here's a list of things that I learned from Austin about things that you can do to work with deficient planets. Number 1, donation and relation. If you have a deficient Mercury, giving a monetary donation to the American Civil Liberties Union or the Electronic Frontier Foundation is a form of planetary remediation. You are putting yourself in a position where you are making friends with Mercury. If you have a deficient moon, spending some time donating to a food bank is a good way of feeding the moon. You're feeding other people. You're meeting their food needs. You're building a better relationship with the moon. If you have a deficient sun, donating to a cause that raises awareness helps your relationship with your sun. Relation is another thing that you can do. Relating to the children of that planet. There are people who very strongly represent the functions of each of the planets. And if you read some of the old grimoires and spell books and astrological books, they will sometimes tell you, if you're going to do a Mercury spell, to dress up in the garb of a scribe. Relating to people who represent those planets can help you build a healthy relationship. If you have a difficult time with Mars, spending time volunteering at a Veterans Association hospital, or administration hospital, will help to build up your relationship with Mars. If you have a hard time with the moon, spending time with mothers can help you build up your relationship with the moon. Spending time with actors can help you build up your relationship with the sun. Spending time with Geminis can help build up your relationship with Mercury. Therapy. I was critical of modern astrology for only prescribing therapy, but there are times when, if you're finding that you're having a hard time shining, or you're having a hard time building healthy relationships, or you find yourself excessively phobic of public speaking and you're in a position where you need to do it, getting help from a therapist can help you to build up a relationship with a deficient planet. Crystals and clothes are other ways of building up relationships with deficient planets. I am not a person who is an expert in crystals. So if we want to talk about crystals, I am guessing that there are people who are taking this class who will be able to talk intelligently about, if you have a deficient Mercury, you want this crystal. If you have a deficient Saturn, you want this crystal. The only crystals that I am aware of that will help you with deficient planets are, if you have a deficient Sun, you want citrine. If you have a deficient Saturn, you want obsidian. Those are the ones that I know. And clothes. Each of the planets has colors assigned to them. If your Saturn is deficient, dress in black. If your Venus is deficient, I believe Venus's color is green. Dress in more green. By the same token, if your Venus is deficient, dressing up, dressing in high fashion, dressing attractively, doing your hair, this feeds a deficient Venus function. If you have a deficient Mars, wearing athletic clothes can feed a deficient Mars. Dressing like someone who means business has been shown to communicate to your brain that it's time to get to work and can feed a deficient Saturn. Planetary deity work is another way to feed deficient planets. This is a form of remediation that I'm very fond of. It is a common remediation technique to pray the Orphic hymn to the planet in question during the planetary hours. There is a translation of the Orphic hymns by, I actually have a copy of the Orphic hymns that lives next to my desk. Thomas Taylor has a translation of the Orphic hymns from early modern period. It sounds Shakespearean. That is in the public domain. So if you search for Orphic hymn to Venus, you will probably get Taylor's translation. And so there's really not an excuse, at least as far as the public domain is concerned, not to use planetary hymns. I have a article that I wrote about my experience of praying the Orphic hymn to Mars for a month. And I was very skeptical that simply praying the Orphic hymn at the hour and time of Mars for 4 weeks in a row would do anything. It actually did so much for my Mars function. You have no idea. It just so happened, weirdly, that I decided that I was going to pray outside. And I had a neighbor who was very nosy. And I had a choice between displaying courage and going out and praying anyway, even though my neighbor would be able to hear me, and staying inside and waiting until they went inside. And it was Mars, so I had the courage and went out and did it anyway. That neighbor avoided me after that, but my Mars function is much better, and to be honest, having that neighbor avoid me is probably not such a bad thing. Education. If you have a Mercury function that is not healthy, if it is deficient, taking a math class, and I say this as somebody who hates math, might be a good idea. Taking a logic class, taking an analytical philosophy class, learning how to program, taking a writing class. All of these things can feed your Mercury function. If you have a Venus function that is dysfunctional, taking a design class, watching a fashion vlogger, taking an art history class, learning how to put makeup on. All of these things can feed your Venus. All of these things can feed planets. Taking an appropriate class on things that are ruled by the planets. Lastly, diet. This is not something that I'm going to dive into in particular detail. If you have a deficient moon, eating comfort food feeds your moon. Eating just because it tastes good and is comforting to you feeds your moon. If you have a deficient Mars, eating the diet of an athlete can feed your Mars. If you have a deficient Saturn, regular meal times can feed your Saturn. You can kind of tell. No, I'm not going to say that because I disagree with it because I think it is too shallow. Never mind. All right, before I move on to this, does anyone have any trouble? I'm going to look over the chat for a second. Someone says the balance between individual therapy and fixing the society we live in is important and rather under-considered, in my opinion. I think it's absolutely true that blaming people for societal problems is absolutely not okay. However, you are not in the position where you can fix society. You are in the position where you are responsible for your actions. And this is not to say to beat yourself up, but there are many times in life when someone else made a mess and you're in the position where you're the only one who can clean it up. And taking personal responsibility and going into therapy, even when you're dealing with a societal problem, doing personal planetary remediation even though it's a societal problem. Sometimes these things are necessary even though it's not fair. And sitting around and bitching about societal problems, which is not what I say you're doing. I just want to balance the scales here a little bit. Thank you, Libra Icy. Sitting around and bitching about society instead of doing your own homework doesn't punish society, it just punishes you. So, and there's somebody recommending health techniques. Definitely a place for personal therapy. Yeah, I was in therapy for a few years pretty intensely, and it changed my life in the best possible way. Someone says, having taken up an occasional practice of praying the Orphic hymns can confirm good. We've been using this URL on account of their formatted pretty and good for phone screens. Yeah, Renaissance Astrology, which is Christopher Warnock's site, is excellent for the Orphic hymns. Yeah, alright, so that's deficient planets. Do you all have some ideas for things that you might do to deal with deficient planets that you're dealing with right now? What do you think? Someone says, a good therapist will acknowledge that society is broken in many ways and give you tools to improve your situation without blaming you. Yeah, for sure. I had a therapist like that, and I wish I could clone her and like have her work with each of you if that's something that you want, because she was absolutely fabulous. If you're in San Francisco, I can give you a referral. She was fantastic. Assuming she's still there. I stopped seeing her when I left California for obvious reasons. What do you think? Ideas for things to do with deficient planets, or are you finding that your issues are more with excessive planets? Sun remediation, working with friends to get a better outside view of who we are. Yeah, that's excellent. Such a good idea. Several people are typing, which is why I'm being quiet right now. Despite the fact that almost everything I do hinges on Mercury, I still feel it's not where it should be, particularly right now. And that is exactly a perfect example of why all of this stuff is subjective. You know, I don't think I'm outing you if I say that you have jobs, not just a job, that requires a very strong Mercury. And, you know, if you are a professional athlete, you're going to require a lot more Mars than somebody without it. And you might feel, even if you have a really strong Mars, like you need more. And someone in your position, I am absolutely not surprised that you feel like you need more Mercury. I am in a similar position, and I feel like I have a bottomless need for Mercury. If my physical health would allow it, I would just be drinking coffee all day long because I just need that much Mercury. Someone says, for Mars, implementing exercise into my routine. Yes, yes, Mars and exercise, perfect. The Moon, take a shower after this talk. All right, yeah, that's a good example. I'd heard that making a donation to a planetary-related charity of an amount related to the planet on the day and hour was great for improving your relationship with the planet. I'm not sure if that's something that one person recommended or a general thing, so good to know on that one. Yeah, making a donation on the planetary day and hour is an excellent idea. I'm not so into the planetary numbers, but I would imagine that's a good idea too. So someone says, I'm still trying to understand which is which for me. I think maybe my Pluto ascendant creates very extreme oscillations between the two because I overcorrect a problem and create a new one. Ooh, yeah, having Pluto near the ascendant means that you definitely signed up for life on hard mode. Which if you are as easily bored as I am, is not necessarily a problem. In that case, you might benefit from doing some Buddhist style empty mind meditation just to gather more data, or talk to people who know you well who can help you get some perspective. Mercury Moon remediation, write more. I've been journaling every night, but it's not enough for me to just write about my life things. I've been wanting to go back and edit old writing of mine, and I think that would be good for my Mercury and my Moon both. Maybe even my Sun. Get a better gauge of how good of a writer I actually am. Yeah, that's a really great idea. Editing, I think, is also Saturn as well. You're disciplining your words. Someone says it's probably less effective than a direct approach, but I've thought about working with personal deities planet-wise. Sekhmet is definitely a goddess who could help with Mars. Jehudi is connected with Mercury, even if it's not a connection I acknowledge frequently in my practice. Perhaps together with direct planetary deity work would work out. I'm going to say something that is going to bring all of the hard polytheists down on my head. But the ancients syncretized the gods when they were talking about them astrologically. And if you feel called to work with Sekhmet instead of Aries or Mars, I would say that that is still Mars remediation work. If you're called to work with Jehudi instead of Mercury, Thoth, Odin, all of these are valid ways of working with Mercury. One of the things that Austin said is that you should always apply these things to your own practice. So, if you're a druid, you might want to work with the Morgan instead of Aries. If you are, you gave some excellent examples there, so I'm not going to pile on the examples. But direct work with deities who are in your sphere of influence is a great way of doing planetary therapy. And someone says that they should poke Hermes. Yeah, that's a great idea. The Greeks called the planets after the names of their gods: Aphrodite, Hermes, Aries instead of Mars. So if you're working with the Hellenistic gods, the Hellenistic peoples agreed with you. Alright, so let us move on to working with excessive planets. Alright, excessive planets are planets that are taking up too much space in your life. Before I move on to this, I'm going to answer one of the questions in chat. Is it important to work with a planet in a way that jives with the sign and house that it's in your chart, or is it just in general? You are probably going to get more mileage if it jives with the sign or house in your chart. But if you are having a very hard time with that planet, any kind of remediation work at all will move you forward. So you're going to get the most bang for your buck working with boundaries in your relationships if you have Mars in the 7th house and you're doing Mars remediation. But if you're having a hard time with Mars in general, just, putting on an athletic watch might be good Mars remediation for you. So, your mileage may vary. Alright, so what do we do with excessive planets? Excessive planets are planets that are taking up too much space. If you are not like me and the other person who said that they can't get enough Mercury, and you're jittery and you feel like you just have too much mercurial energy floating around, you have an excessive planet. Alright, so what do? Donation. I mentioned it as something to do with a deficient planet, but it can also help you with an excessive planet as well. Think of it as you have too much energy, you're putting that energy into the money, and you are giving it to a cause that represents that thing. One of the things that Austin said is that donation will never unbalance a planet. So if you have excessive Mercury, donating to the Penn Foundation, which gives awards to writers, might be a good way of dealing with that. If you have too much Mars and you're dealing with anger management issues, maybe donating to a charity that works with homeless veterans might be a way of working with that indirectly. Abstention. If you have an excessive Mercury and you're drinking 16 cups of coffee, you might want to cut it down. If you are working excessively, you're working 80 hours a week and you are not going to die if you cut your work down, maybe you should drop it down to 60 or 40 or even maybe 30. Planetary deity work. If you have an excessive Mars, praying the Orphic hymn to Mars can actually help you, because part of the Orphic hymn is asking Mars to cool it. All of the Orphic hymns have an element of, please operate properly, don't be too much in my life if that's unbalanced and inappropriate. The orphichems are good for excessive and deficient planets. And planetary therapy. Now, by planetary therapy, I do not mean mental health therapy. If you and your doctor think that you need mental health therapy, get mental health therapy if you possibly can. By planetary therapy, I mean journaling about an excessive planet, or working on that planet directly in some way. You have to be careful if you have an excessive planet, because remember, whatever you do feeds the planet. If you have an excessive planet and you're obsessing about that planet, you're feeding that planet and you're making the situation worse. But if the point of planetary therapy is to raise awareness, then doing planetary therapy will help you with an excessive planet. So you have raised awareness. You have made a plan for what you're going to do to work with planets that are excessive or deficient. Do any of you have any excessive planets, by the way? It seemed like mostly everybody was saying that their planets were deficient. Did anybody have any excessive planets? Out of curiosity. Sort of sometimes. Mars. Oh, that's interesting, considering what I know of your chart. Moon occasionally. Oh, this is something that I forgot to put in this slideshow that is absolutely essential. Sometimes a planet can be excessive in your life and it is not being expressed by you. If you have a partner with anger management problems, you have a difficult relationship with Mars and you need to do Mars remediation. Obviously, they also have a difficult relationship with Mars, but it's important to do your own homework. And you can't change the other people in your life, but sometimes a planet will not express itself through your own actions. It will express itself through other people in your life. And doing remediation for a planet that is showing up externally can help you have a better relationship with that planet in general, and can help you not be in that situation so much. Sometimes a planet will show up in your life externally as something that is unhealthy because it's trying to tell you, hey, this person has unhealthy anger. Look at your own relationship with anger. Are you not being angry enough? Are you not setting enough boundaries? I'm reading what people are saying. So it sounds like the people who are here are having a hard time telling when a planet is excessive. Interesting. Alright, so I'm not going to go through all of the planets, but are there some planets that you're having some issues in particular? I can talk about those a little bit more. Someone says that Mercury is unbalanced, too much in some areas and barely enough to get by in others. Yeah, that is so tricky. Like, when it's too much in one area and not enough in another, because, like, you don't want to starve it completely because you need it in that area of your life, but you also don't want to feed the area where it's excessive. It's one of those times where, you need to, like, get a channel between the two and, like, take some of that excessive and see if you can make it flow into the area where you need it more. Someone guessed, maybe we all have unbalanced Saturn and so are having trouble identifying excesses. It might be that focusing on areas where you're deficient is just a better place to start in general. I mean, at least for this group. I know that when I started working on this, it was very much easier for me to see places where I'm deficient than places where it's excessive. Someone says that I have problems differentiating between Capricorn moon and Saturn problems sometimes. Um, I would say, don't bother differentiating, because if you have a Capricorn moon, that necessarily means that your moon and your Saturn are part of a polarity. They are anyway. The answer to the moon is always yes, comfort, and the answer to Saturn is always no, comfort. So it is necessary to find a balance between the moon and Saturn in that regard. If you have the moon in Capricorn, finding that right balance is one of the things that you're majoring in. So someone wants to know what an excessive Jupiter looks like in particular. I'd imagine self-aggrandizing leans more toward being a sun issue. Yes, self-aggrandizing is definitely sun. Jupiter gets everything else, however. Jupiter tends to be excessively. Drinking too much, eating too much, partying too much, taking up too much space, but not necessarily in a me way. You know how there are sometimes people who, like, when they're in the room, no one else can exist, not because they're trying to draw attention to themselves, but because they're so loud and, like, they just take up too much psychic space. That is a Jupiter problem. And it sometimes goes along with having sun issues, but, there are just some people who, like, they're talking and no one else can talk, even if it's one of those situations where, it's a party and everybody's talking over everybody, just because they're too loud and they take up too much space. Someone says, I feel like an excessive Jupiter shows with being excessive. Yeah, spending too much. Gambling is an excessive Jupiter. Excessively risk-taking behaviors can be excessive Jupiter. It can also be excessive Mars, if it's more about daring do, but, like, Jupiter is also about taking risks. And yeah, that's why it rules gambling. Someone says, so it seems like planets that are deficient may actually be an issue with their opposite being in excess. So that might also be something to look at if everyone is noticing deficiencies. Yes, thank you, absolutely. A deficient Venus might be an excessive Mars. A deficient moon might be an excessive Saturn. Look at those polarities. Compare them. If you, like you said, if you're finding a deficiency, see if there's an excessive leak elsewhere. How about Jupiter then, given that it's the opposite of... How about Saturn then, given that it's the opposite of Jupiter? Saturn is overly cautious. It puts up boundaries that don't need to be there. It says no way more often than it should. Ebenezer Scrooge was a Saturn. Skinflint, refusal to be generous, refusal to spend. Saturn is the hermit, which can be a good thing if you're, doing the monastic, cultivating silence thing, but it can also reflect as, not socializing enough, not taking up enough space at parties. Yes, Saturn is the opposite of the moon. When you are in a situation where you need to choose between buckling down and getting something done and quitting because it's something that you don't want to do, if you quit, you're feeding the moon. If you keep working, you're feeding Saturn. That's a common choice that people need to make. Do I take care of myself, or do I keep on working and push myself? That is the moon versus Saturn. Does that make sense? Alright, if it doesn't make sense, we can talk about that later. Okay, cool. Yeah. Yeah, there can be multiple polarities for each. If you're having a hard time with that, that might be a sign of an excessive Saturn. Remember I said that black and white thinking is very Saturn? If you're having a hard time with the idea that a planet can be part of two polarities, that is a, you might want to look at Saturn. All right, so you have gotten awareness. You have made a plan. The next step is to practice. Now, it is important to aim for presence and not for perfection. Show up. Don't try to do it perfectly. It is better to pray the Orphic hymn, speed reading every day, than it is to do a 3-hour ritual once a month. Regularly showing up, regularly practicing in small amounts is the best way to start. And it's called a practice because you need to practice. If you were doing this right already, you would not need to do remediation work. So be kind to yourself. Keep showing up. Practice. Keep at it. You can do it! Alright, that's the end of what I have planned. Questions? How is everybody doing? Are you making plans? Are you excited? Can putting boundaries on oneself rather than others be an excessive Saturn? Yes. Sometimes it is easier to starve yourself than it is to say no to other people. Enforcing boundaries is Mars, however. If you know what boundaries are, know that people are crossing them, and do nothing, that is a deficient Mars. If you don't notice people stepping over your boundaries in the first place, that is Saturn. That can also be an excessive Jupiter, by the way. Jupiter wants to live in a place without boundaries. And Jupiter is the open ocean. Jupiter is the traditional ruler of Pisces. And Jupiter, Sagittarius doesn't like boundaries very much either. So Jupiter has a hard time running over people's boundaries, has a hard time defending boundaries. So not recognizing boundaries can be an excessive Jupiter and a deficient Saturn. Not defending them, deficient Mars. Someone says, well, I've been shoving myself into a box for everyone else's comfort for years, so there's my Saturn issue making itself known properly. Unfortunately, I'm so sorry. Yeah, that might be Saturn. I also think that you might want to consider working on Mars as well. Because if you're able to recognize it that quickly, that tells me that your Saturn is functioning properly. You're just not sending out the watchdogs in the way that you should. Several people are typing. I love when that happens. I would do it too, yeah. I know. I hate setting boundaries too. I hate saying no. I hate telling people to back off. So someone says, I have some ideas on resolving Mercury issues, but I'm kind of struggling with Mercury in Leo. So when we're talking about the signs, I always like to start with what the need each sign is trying to meet is. Leo is your need for attention. It is the child on the swing yelling, look at me! It's a very healthy part of being human. I think that Leo gets bashed way too much. We need attention. We need affirmation. We need people to see us who we are and to celebrate that. Leo is also the need to take a risk and be vulnerable and say that the reaction that people give to your presentation of yourself or of something you've made matters. So if you have Mercury there, you have the need to communicate things that matter and have them be heard. You have the need to be recognized for your intelligence and your communication ability. And you have the need to be recognized in conversation for who you are and have who you are be celebrated in conversation. So does that help? Oh, I didn't see that there's more. Specifically, I'm being pitched into video content. It's also in my 10th house, and I know that that would line up and probably fulfill those needs, but it's so uncomfortable. Yeah, needing to perform technology, equipment, video, like, yeah. There are some people who, if they're being pushed into video, I would be like, well, are you sure? But Mercury in the 10th house in Leo, that sounds like the chart of somebody who would benefit quite a lot from doing video. So it sounds like my Jupiter-Saturn dynamic is broken then. I have such a hard time hitting a healthy social distance, as if I'm shooting in the dark. It's often either too close or too distant. So both planets are excessive, I think. It sounds like what you need to work on is awareness. And in that particular situation, maybe asking some close friends for feedback about social distance. I'm tempted to make a 6 feet COVID joke here, but I'm not going to do it. But maybe that would help. Which planets do you think something like social anxiety would relate to? I'd think Mercury, but mine focuses so heavily on emotions, what other people feel, how I make other people feel, emotional boundaries, that strictly Mercury doesn't really track. So someone says that with social anxiety, for them it comes down to the moon. If your issue with social anxiety is that you're picking up on other people's emotions too much, that I definitely see the moon as an argument. I could see that as a potential kaleidoscope of things, unfortunately. Improper boundaries can be an issue. So that might be a situation where wearing some obsidian might help. Obviously, if you have diagnosed social anxiety, go see a therapist, mental health practitioner, blah, 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 blah. But, so, difficulty setting boundaries, difficulty setting psychic boundaries, warding, putting up, I'm blanking on the word for it, but wards, shields, magical, those sorts of things can help. Difficulty with how I make other people feel, that could be an issue with the sun. If you feel as though you cannot shine because other people do not appreciate your light, that can be a sun issue. And it might be that you need to find a different audience. If you feel as though you can't be yourself because the people around you are going to disapprove of you, whatever you do, you need to find other people who appreciate what you have to give. Good to be in therapy. I'm being so careful to preface everything, and probably I should have just said at the beginning, if you need medical advice, talk to a medical person and then be done with it. But I don't know. I've watched so many people try to fix very serious health issues with magic and spirit work and so on. I just go to the doctor, people. Like, I know there are problems with Western medicine, but honestly, sometimes focusing on those problems is just fear. So with the emotional boundaries and anxiety, it sounds like Saturn is letting the moon run rampant or finding a different audience. Sorry, the sun. Yeah, those are places to start. Something I very strongly believe in with all of these things is to experiment. Try things. You know, it's just like if you have a headache, you know, you might start with putting lavender essential oil on your forehead. You might take Tylenol. You might put an ice pack on the back of your head. Like, you try things until the problem goes away. It's the same exact thing with planetary remediation. Try things. If it's a matter of discipline, keep on keeping on with the discipline. But if something isn't working, just drop it and try something else. Don't be afraid to try things. Unless it's drinking bleach. Alright, how are we doing? Are you all excited to go out and start doing planetary remediation? I want to hear about your experiences and the things that you try and the things that work and the things that don't work in the server, but where are you at now? So glad you could make it, Stell. I hope this helped. Oh, you're tired. I've been talking for 2 hours. Again, 4 hours of lectures in 3 days, y'all. It's a good thing I had a coffee before this. I am so glad this is a last talk before early December. Like, I love doing this, but my Mercury is just like, I'm done. This is enough. Goodbye. Oh, someone just said you're stronger than I am. Oh my goodness. If I had attempted this a year ago, oh my gods. I had such a hard time giving a 1-hour lecture when I first started doing these. Like, talk about needing Mercury remediation. I would do one of these things and I would be shot for 3 days. And like, I knew that it was something that I needed to do because, you know, I have Mercury in the midheaven. I've got a very, 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 very prominent sun, and I knew that I was in shining. But, oh my goodness, you guys, it was so freaking hard. Oh, yay! Someone just said it was a very productive talk. So much place for direct action, too. You are so welcome. I love this sort of thing. And I might... I'm not going to get ahead of myself here, but... Someone just said that they like how the classes are grouped so that they can bury themselves in it for a week. Yeah, I mean, getting to listen to Astrobabble on a regular basis, I say this all the time, but you know, it is learning language, and it just so happened that they all tend to group together in the month, but I think that that's a good thing overall. Not just because I have a break of a couple of weeks where I don't have to do any of these at all. Will there be a recording? Yes, I'm recording this right now. I try to always do a recording of all of my talks. And if you need the slides, I can share the slides with you as well when I share the recording. Aww. So someone just said, thank you for your time as always. You've been improving so much with each talk, and I love that I've been able to see your growth. I'm excited to see where you're at in a year. I'm excited to see where I'm at in a year too. I am actually wondering if, you know, a year or 5 years from now, if doing talks like this, like a college professor, you know, 3 to 5 days a week, is where I end up, because the more I do them, the more I find that I need them. And I'm not just saying that to toot my own horn. These talks are a direct result of planetary remediation. Like I said a moment ago, I could not have imagined doing this a year ago. And so, you know, it might feel like you're going way slow. You may think, you know, you may look at your chart and be like, oh my goodness, I can't shine nearly as much as my chart says I need to. No, no, no. You will be so surprised what your capacity is when you sit down and do the work. How Saturnine of me was that just now? Oh my gods. Always down to be an assistant slash TA slash tutor for you. Yeah, if you have some ideas for what you might want to do, hit me up. If you've been studying with me for a while and you want to start teaching, I've said this repeatedly, but I'll say it again. I think that teaching is one of the best things you can do for your learning. And if you want to get up here and start doing Astro Talks, and you know, I'm reasonably sure you know what you're talking about, yeah, you should be up here. Especially if it's going to be helping with remediation, like this has been helping me with remediation. So, yeah, cool stuff, y'all. Alright, it looks like we have questions. Last call for questions. It looks like we're slowing down on that score. When people start thanking me, that's when I know I need to get off the stage most of the time. Thank you, goodbye, Ada. I mean, I have been talking for like 2 hours and 10 minutes. I actually left a party to come here. I'm going to come back and everybody's going to be like, where were you? And I'm going to be like, you don't want to know because you don't want to hear the astro babble. You're so welcome, and I'm so glad that you came. I want to hear all about what you do with this. I do need, well, I probably don't need food because I went to a pub before this, but yeah, I do need food and water. Alright, I am going to turn off the recording now.